Are you an independent musician feeling overwhelmed by the endless act of juggling creativity, business, and self-care? You're not alone. That's why I created the Artist Mind Map. The Artist Mind Map is a free blueprint designed to help you get clear on the route you need to take to attain your career goals in alignment to your artistic values. This is not just another random PDF page for the forgotten corners of your hard disk. It's a timeless roadmap you can use for decades to come. Think of it as a go-to overview to consult. When you grab your free mind map, you get exclusive access to a masterclass that will take your career to the next level. I use the same methodologies and systems for my high-end paying clients and students. So why am I giving it to you for free? Simple. I want to build a community of artists who can count on each other for safe spaces. Music saved my life. I believe that you have all that it takes to be the artist you were meant to be, if you're willing to put in the work. And more importantly, understanding what that work is. And the Artist Mind Map was designed to help you do exactly that. So if this resonates with you, go to artistmindmap.com and download this resource. artistmindmap.com. Welcome to another session Solocast. These Solocasts were designed to help independent artists and musicians like you navigate the very complex labyrinth that is your artistic practice and career. They're based on empirical research and experiences of my own career as an independent musician and an educator and coach working with artists just like you. The primary aim behind these sessions is to offer accessibility to the kind of education many of us need to work with in order to forward ourselves in these very confusing times as empowered and independent artists in the truest sense of the word. Hey folks, welcome back. I hope you're well. I'm back in the house and we are going to be doing another solo cast talking about what is negative bias and how it affects musicians. I actually just got back from tour. It was a very emotional, very intense experience. The interaction and engagement I had with my colleagues after all this time, a lot of these folks I hadn't met in 5 years since the pandemic, was a nice feeling. I hope I'm not going on too much of a ramble here, but just for context, it just gave me a little more inspiration again, a little more intent, a little more why I'm doing this. And I guess it was reassuring to get the feeling while engaging with so many collaborators from so many extremely diverse backgrounds to have the feeling of working on something that actually does help people. It was just so good to have this body of work to not just be proud of. I know I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but also fall back upon. I literally went back and read back on some of my research to kind of remind myself of how I would like to approach my work. So yeah, full disclosure, I read some of my own blog posts and go through some of my own research while on the road to remind myself on patterns I want to change in my own work, in my own practice, and basically try and make sure that I am actually practicing what I quote-unquote preach. Although, just to be clear, I'm really trying hard not to be a preacher here. I'm just sharing. So with that in mind, let's move on. Again, today's topic is about negative bias and how it affects musicians. In case you hadn't noticed, most of these solocasts are also available as blog posts. So if you want a less rambly, more to the point, written literature to just go through, consider checking out my blog. I'll include the link in the episode notes. Okay, here it goes. In the dimly lit corners of rehearsal spaces, the cramped seats of tour buses, sleepless nights before a release, musicians will often unwittingly grapple with an unseen enemy they've probably never confronted consciously: negative bias. This natural cognitive tendency to focus more on intensely negative experiences over positive ones has been the driving force behind things like perfectionism and similarly debilitating hurdles for artistic expression. As we operate regularly in environments which are ripe with criticism, competition, and self-evaluation. Understanding this negative bias, in my opinion, and experience is crucial, not just for our creative output, so to speak, but our baseline mental health. Let's discuss. Understanding negative bias. Negative bias or negativity bias is a well-documented psychological concept. Negative events, emotions, or feedback have a more significant impact on an individual's psychological state than neutral or positive ones. This bias is thought to be an evolutionary mechanism. Our ancestors needed to pay more attention to threats, which are basically negative stimuli, than to non-threatening situations to survive. This is well documented, and if you have a look at the blog post as well, you'll see some references to, well, this might have been advantageous in, a prehistoric context. It has some pretty profound implications in the modern world, especially in workspaces where creative output and self-worth are closely intertwined, like ours, musicians. And studies indicate that negative emotions can trigger a more substantial cognitive response. This is the tricky part, compared to positive ones. So you're actually going to be feeling more natural urges to pay attention to negative impulses than the positive ones, as horrible as that sounds. Part of this is due to the brain's predisposition to encode and recall negative information more efficiently. It's an inherent wiring that our neurological system just is apparently built with. The impact on musicians. Musicians, sadly, or artists are not immune to this bias. A lot of times we have these feelings of invincibility and think we are because the high of being on stage and this kind of divine power art seems to give us. It gives us these feelings of invincibility. But the truth of the matter is we are not immune to this inherently neurological, physiological aspect at all. In fact, on the contrary, it turns out we are actually probably more susceptible to negativity bias due to the nature of our work, which is pretty much always subject to public scrutiny and personal self-assessment. So let's unpack self-criticism and perfectionism and the links that might have with negativity bias. Musicians are often their own harshest critics. I know I can be sometimes. And negative bias can inflame this self-criticism, leading us to fixate on minor mistakes during performances or in recordings or rehearsals, while downplaying or entirely overlooking the inherent success the act of playing music actually is. I actually did deal with a lot of this during the rehearsals on my last tour. Thankfully, it all turned out very well, but this hits really close to home. You'd think I'd be a lot better at handling that, or just be completely immune to something like this, but I'm really not. This fixation on negativity bias with or without our permission, conscious permission, is kind of what drives perfectionism, which in itself is a double-edged sword in the creative process. Because on one hand, perfectionism is the kind of thing that can push us to get better at what we do, while on the other, perfectionism and negative bias when combined. So when perfectionism is fueled by negative bias, additionally, that leads to that endless cycle of dissatisfaction, self-doubt, where no accomplishment feels good enough. You familiar with that? I know I am. The emotional turbulence that comes with all of this, generally speaking, the emotional intensity that accompanies music creation and performance can be amplified greatly by smaller instances, both the glorious ones, but in this case, even the negative ones. So negative bias plays a big role in amplifying the emotional intensity of our musical experiences. We might receive overwhelmingly positive feedback and still dwell on a single negative comment, allowing it to overshadow all the praise we just got. And that can lead to a very disproportionate emotional response where negative experiences induce anxiety, depression, or even a reluctance to perform in some cases. Even that is something I have faced in the past. Research has shown that musicians are at a higher risk for mental health issues such as anxiety and depression as well, by the way. Partly due to the intense emotional highs and lows that the work involves, and also because mental health is still a bit of a taboo topic, even though it's not as bad as it used to be. But the music industry still does not address the degree of mental health pressures artists and musicians deal with. And despite all the social media hullabaloo, my take on this is that we're just not talking about the correlations between being an artist and mental health enough. That's me. One indirect effect of negative bias a lot of us do not realize is the manner in which it often results in creative blocks. When we're overly focused on potential failures or past mistakes, our ability to experiment and take risks can be stifled. And the fear of criticism or rejection might lead to a more conservative approach to music making. This can result in a severe stagnation of artistic growth as the musician's work becomes more about avoiding negative outcomes rather than actually pursuing true creative inspiration. Not something we necessarily take into account consciously, because usually when we're in the thick of it, we're so caught up in these patterns, and most professional musicians will have their coping mechanisms. You know, if you've made it to the status, for lack of a better term, of a professional musician, you will have had to go through some unpleasant experiences. Those are a lot of times, for better or for us, kind of the testing waters for if we're actually up for it, up for the lifelong commitment to music as a profession. So the collateral damage to that is a lot of us will have coping mechanisms wherein we just kind of go into a more like a safe coping mode and just kind of do our job and, end up doing just that, doing the job. But music is not just about doing a job. It really is a lot more. And in the long run, if you're constantly stuck in the pattern of practicing your art from a space of survival, somewhere along the line, that is not going to be fulfilling enough for you to sustain your career. Most of us are not in it for the money. It's not exactly the career choice people make to be billionaires, though I'm not close to that option. I think musicians should be abundant and make money, as banal as that sounds. But long story short, most of us got into this because it was a calling. So in the long run, if fulfillment is not something we're nailing, we're not going to be happy. It will eat us up. All right, so let's talk about a few strategies to mitigate negative bias. Now that we've established the actual existence and the risks of this phenomena, I want to leave you with some suggestions on actually dealing with it. So here we go. Number one, cognitive reframing. Now, cognitive reframing, or simply known as reframing in colloquial terms, is a technique that encourages individuals to reinterpret negative thoughts or experiences in a more positive or neutral light. This might involve actively challenging negative self-talk, and I've talked about this in a few other episodes as well, or reinterpreting criticism as constructive feedback rather than a personal failure. This is not easier said than done, and in a lot of cases it's probably too much asked, but I'm just saying, if you do see potential for this to actually have space to exercise, you might want to try it out. If you are dealing with criticism which doesn't necessarily come from a malicious space, but is still hurtful, those are situations which exist, consider using cognitive reframing as a tool to see if it doesn't help you deal with the situation from a more positive space. And just to be clear, I'm not a fan of toxic positivity, and the whole reframing everything to sound positive is not something I necessarily advocate, but reframing doesn't necessarily have to be that. It just gives you the option, or asks you anyway, to check and see if there's not another perspective you could take on the same situation which feels like crap while you're in the thick of it. Does that make sense? I hope so. Also, studies suggest that cognitive reframing could help reduce the impact of negative bias generally, which allows musicians to maintain a healthier perspective on their work and self-worth on a long-term basis. So if you kind of imbibe this tool as a long-term lens on how you approach your career, it might be something worth looking into with some decent results. 2. Mindfulness and meditation. You've probably heard enough about this mindfulness meditation. These can tend to be buzzwords in the space. But these practices do emphasize non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. Hence, can also be effective in mitigating negative bias as well, because you're just kind of neutralizing it without judging too much about what exactly is going on while you're in the thick of it. So by focusing on the here and now, we can reduce the tendency to ruminate on past mistakes or anxieties about future performances. Furthermore, we can also maybe help ourselves not let trauma or past trauma dictate our actions. Research also has shown, by the way, that mindfulness can decrease the influence of negative bias by reducing emotional reactivity and promoting a more balanced perspective generally towards situations. By the way, a lot of these research things I'm pointing to, they do have references. So if you want to check up on those, there are some useful links on the blog post as well. I would like to add, though, at this point, that while mindfulness is often looked upon as a somewhat binary concept or often inherently linked to spiritual or religious practices, the truth of the matter is that there are many more neutral practices that are equally effective in inducing this state in my experience. Some simpler examples of these, which I personally do resonate with, are going for a run or working out. I'm a bit of a gym rat. Dancing. I don't dance often enough these days, but when I do, I am always reminded of how healing an experience it can be. Or journaling even. So it doesn't necessarily have to have a spiritual or a religious connotation to it. Mindfulness really is about figuring out methodologies with which you help yourself be in the moment. Okay? So that was number 1 and number 2. Cognitive reframing. Number 2 was mindfulness and meditation. Number 3 is positive feedback loops. Now, this has a caveat, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of it as well. But for now, let's start off unpacking what a positive feedback loop is. Creating positive feedback loops within a musician's environment can counterbalance the effects of negative bias. Sure, that's the whole idea. This could involve surrounding oneself with supportive peers who offer constructive and encouraging feedback, or developing personal rituals that reinforce positive achievements. It's important, though, and this is the caveat I wanted to make sure I do address. It's important, though, to distinguish between these positive feedback loops and echo chambers, where people keep praising each other meaninglessly as a social nicety. Me, personally, I'm very skeptic about social niceties. I'm all for politeness is underrated in a lot of parts of the world. Politeness, just being well-mannered. I love well-mannered people. That's me. But if you're getting into meaningless flattery as a form of social nicety, or just kissing ass, really, to be honest, that's not a positive feedback loop. That is a whole different crap show. And that is definitely not what I'm referring to here, just to clarify. Positive feedback loops is when you're in a circle of people who are genuine, who give you genuine feedback and aim to uplift you by being authentic and genuine. So those were the little tools I would recommend trying out. Cognitive reframing, mindfulness, meditation, and positive feedback loops, which is also, can be looked upon as community and groups of like-minded people. The idea at the end of the day is to thrive despite negative bias. Nobody gets rid of their negative biases. It's something we kind of learn to live with because it is part of the human condition. But you don't want to just survive despite this condition, despite this inherent human condition, but you want to thrive. So the idea is to explore from this context how we could also harness this bias. You got to remember, like our ancestors, the reason why they had this little inbuilt system in their brain was actually for our benefit, or their benefit anyway. And eventually down the line, it kind of became redundant because we live in a world where that degree of hypervigilance is probably not relevant in the way it used to be with our hunter-gatherer ancestors. But in this current zeitgeist, it's still worth looking at and examining if it isn't something which we can try and use to our advantage without being manipulative per se, but just check and see if we can't use it to our positive advantage. Some actionable steps in which we can do it. So this is like a bonus part to this whole episode here. I'm going to give you some actionable steps which you can try and use to overcome negative bias. Okay, number one, reframe your self-talk. This is similar to cognitive framing, but in this case, you really want to keep an eye out and really be very mindful, very aware of the self-talk happening within your inner self. So the inner dialogue you keep dealing with, we all deal with, you want to reframe it. We often fall into this trap of harsh self-criticism. I talked about this earlier on, focusing on what went wrong rather than celebrating what went right. So cognitive reframing, again, involves challenging negative thoughts. So every time you have a negative thought, challenge it. And try and see if you can't replace them with a more balanced, realistic retort instead. Example, after a performance, instead of fixating on a missed note, acknowledge the overall success of the event. Banal, but could work. An actionable step to make a habit out of this is, after every performance or practice session, write down 3 things that went well before you address any areas of improvement. Write down 3 positive things that went well. This practice helps shift focus from negativity to a more positive one. But it also forces you, once you make that a habit, you're kind of balancing out this inherent bias towards negativity. Because the negative parts, the areas of improvement you think you need to focus on, you probably will be confronted with those anyways. But the positive part of it is something which might need a little more effort to focus on, especially towards the beginning, if this concept is something new to you. Number 2, embrace constructive criticism. Criticism is inevitable in the arts, but how you perceive and respond to it can make a difference. Rather than seeing criticism as a personal attack, consider viewing it as an opportunity for growth. Reframe criticism. Again, a lot of reframing here. Assuming, of course, it is constructive. And use it as a tool for refinement, not a judgment of your worth as a musician. And that is the part I want you to really take away. My teacher, Kenny Werner, always makes this reference, and I think I'm too dumb to quote him directly right now, but he always would keep saying about how determining our value as a human on the basis of how well we play music is like a miserably stupid thing to do. Something on those lines. He probably didn't say miserably stupid, but something on the same line. So generally speaking, that's something you really do want to avoid. Your value as a human being really does not have anything to do with how you play music. It's also not as black and white. There's so much space for debate in a statement like that. But generally speaking, assuming you're in a similar boat I'm in, and assuming you're listening to this podcast for the reasons I think you are, I would argue that's what you want to hear. Don't base your value as a human on your musical skills. That's really not going to work. And the last thing it's going to do is give you actually improved musical skills. All right, number 3, cultivate a growth mindset. There's another blog post on embracing a growth mindset and exactly what that is. I unpack it a little more in the context of a musician. The blog post is already out, and I think I'm going to put out a podcast episode on that soon as well. Go check it out. How cultivate a growth mindset and what exactly that is. For now, here's a short summary of what it is. A growth mindset is basically the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. And this can significantly counteract negative bias. Because musicians with a growth mindset see challenges as opportunities to learn rather than threats to their self-worth. An actionable step to kind of master this would be set specific achievable goals for your musical development and track your progress over time. Celebrate small victories along the way as evidence of your growth, and regularly remind yourself that every mistake is a step toward mastery. Now, this might seem like a bit of a mindfuck in the beginning, but it really is really true. Try and look at failure as a friend. Try and look at obstacles as a friend. Every time you come across something that feels like a setback, reframe it into a challenge and set specific goals for your music development. Track it. By the way, I have a little practice journal in case you're interested in downloading it. I think if you're, again, on the blog post as well, there's a pop-up which gives you a link or something else. You can always just email me or get in touch wherever. It's just one page on a PDF, but it's got a really super sweet system on how to plan out your practice routine on a weekly basis without getting too boring or too dreary. And it's worked wonders for my practice routine anyway. It's super simple, and I've been told it can be very helpful. So that was number 3, cultivating a growth mindset. And just in case you were lost through all this ramble, we are talking about actionable steps to overcome. Let's move on to number 4 now, practicing mindfulness. Again, this is a reiteration of what we talked about earlier on, but in this case, the actionable step I want to leave you with is incorporate short mindfulness sessions into your daily routine. Before a practice session or performance, take 5 minutes to do something like breathe deeply and center yourself, or focus on the sensations of your instrument, the sound of your voice, or the rhythm of your breath. This practice can really be a game changer. Now, what you choose as your little ritual is something I'm going to leave up to you. Not that you are waiting for my permission, but the point I'm trying to make is choose your own ritual. That's absolutely fine. The important thing is practice it though. Make it a habit. Make it a habit that you do before every rehearsal, before every practice session, before every gig. Use it. Use it. I have this system wherein I do 11-day challenges, 21-day challenges. The hardest I've gone is a 108-day challenge, which my teacher Kai Eckhart would guide me through back in the day when I was doing his mentorship program. And that can really help to kind of instill or install a habit in our system. If you're someone who struggles with consistency, consider doing challenges. Consider doing an 11-day challenge of maintaining a daily ritual of mindfulness, whatever it may be. The simplest exercise I know is, again, from my teacher Kenny Warner, who says just breathe for 30 seconds. You're doing it anyway. And just watch yourself breathe for 30 seconds. Put your timer on for 30 seconds and just watch yourself breathe. And do that every day, 11 days long. And that's a habit. Or at least you're en route making a habit. Go figure. Number 5, surrounding yourself with positivity and positive circles. So hashtag community here. The actionable step to take here is start building a support network of fellow musicians, artists who share similar goals and similar philosophies in life. Try to engage in group practices if you can. I know it's not easier said than done. It is easier said than done. But try and engage in these group practices, workshops, or discussions where positive feedback is not just encouraged, but is a baseline, fundamental approach to the arts, as opposed to something like criticism or constant scrutiny. Yeah, seek out these communities. Do go the extra mile. If you're someone who's struggling to find their people, put in the effort. For whichever reason, this is not something you want to be on your journey without. You want to put in all the effort needed to find at least 2-3 people who feel like your musical fam. Put in the work to try and find these people. And here's a little tip. It might feel tougher in the beginning, but once you're on a roll, you'd be surprised at how this little group can multiply on its own. But that's a topic for a different discussion. Number 6, engage in regular reflection. Reflection is a powerful tool for growth, but it needs to be balanced as well. So regularly reflecting on both your achievements and areas of improvement can provide a more holistic view of your progress. And as you know, we're all about holistic here. I mean, my whole academy is called the Holistic Musician Academy. So you want to use reflection not just to ponder on your weaknesses or areas of improvements, but also your achievements. So always make sure you're keeping both in your peripheral view. Actionable step to do this, keep a journal. Keep a journal where you can reflect on your musical journey. Write about your accomplishments, your lessons learned, the emotions experienced along the way. And over time, that journal will become a testament to your growth and a resource for overcoming future challenges. And number 7, seek professional support. Now, if negative bias becomes something overwhelming and starts affecting your mental health or your passion for music, seeking professional help is crucial. Coaches and therapists who specialize in working with artists can actually provide tools with the right appropriate techniques to your unique needs to manage this little beast of negativity bias. Okay, I hope that helps. As a conclusion, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. So, negative bias is a natural part of the human experience, yeah. However, doesn't have to be a stumbling block for musicians. If you're proactive in taking steps to, 1, reframe your mindset, 2, embrace growth, and 3, surround yourself with the right kind of people, you can transform or at least reframe this entire thing into a powerful catalyst even for your artistic and personal development. Remember, the key here is not to eliminate negative bias, because that's just an impossible task. And then it's also really not worth your time. And who knows, I mean, negativity does have its place in the entire equation. Positivity exists because of it. But the idea is to manage it in a way that allows you to thrive despite. So it's not only are you not letting it cripple you, you are thriving despite your negativity bias. That's where you want to be, both as a musician and as an individual. And you do this through intentional practice, and you rise above the noise, and you let your true creative voice be heard. That's what it really boils down to. Your voice cannot drown amidst the noise, negative or otherwise. You want to rise above the noise. And by addressing negative bias head on and implementing some of these actionable steps I suggested, not only can you overcome these mental hurdles, but you can also emerge stronger, more resilient, and more successful in your artistic pursuits, because it's a different degree of confidence you'll be coming out with. I hope that helps. Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.